How's everyone doing this Wednesday? Everyone, one more minute to roll in and then we will kick it off. All right, let's get started. What did we cover yesterday? More SQL. We did our join table. So we learned about doing a join and an implicit join and an explicit join. When we do an implicit join, we just use the from and specify multiple tables. And then we use our where command to link up those two tables together so they're aligned. When we do our implicit command, we use that word join or inner join, and then use the on command to say where those two tables should join together. So database performance-wise, doing an inner join is probably the way to go. We also did our nested queries as well. So starting to look at things either in a list or filtering based off of a second subquery that we were running in the first one. What else did we learn yesterday? I think that was pretty much the bulk of it. So what we are going to do tonight is we are going to finish up with the very last lesson in Khan Academy, the one that I forgot about yesterday, where we are going to learn to update and delete data in our database. Will be super helpful for us because we are then going to switch over back to our chat app. We are going to reuse our chat front end, and we are going to modify our back end to start saving some data in the database. So once we get out of Khan Academy's kind of sandbox, we will be out in the real world where we will have to get a database server running on your computer, which is always one of those things that can go super smoothly and it will take everyone 3 minutes to set up and we'll be all good. Or it will be a major disaster and we'll be spending the rest of the class trying to get the server running for everyone. One or the other. We will see when we get there. Once we get there, we're going to run a couple SQL commands to get our database set up, to get our table set up, to get some data in the table. We're going to use a program called Beekeeper Studio. So we can run our commands and kind of interact with our database instead of having to be right in the terminal and running the raw SQL commands directly in there. And then we are going to copy our chat server from module 7, copy that into module 8, get our database connection working there. And we're going to start getting some data back and forth. So I know that sounds like a lot. Tomorrow, I'm going to show you a way that is probably a little bit more complicated to get set up, but makes writing your JavaScript code a lot easier to interact with that. So anyway, let's kick it off with Khan Academy. But before I do, does anyone have questions? Okie doke, to Khan Academy we go.
Let's say that we want to create tables to store the data for a diary app. A basic setup would be a users table and a diary logs table. Now, when a user wrote up their diary on the website, we would have some code to execute an insert statement like what I'm pasting in here. So this inserts 2 rows for 2 diary logs, one day after the other. First, where somebody has a horrible fight and buries their woes in 3 pounds of dark chocolate, and the next day, of course, they make up and celebrate with ice cream, as you do. So we can check to see what our diary logs table looks like now, and we can see those 2 posts in there. Now imagine that the user comes back and wants to modify their logs, maybe because they don't want to admit, even to themselves, that they have eaten that much dark chocolate. Now, we've already inserted the data, so at this point, we would need to have code that would execute an update statement like this. Update diary logs set content equals I had a horrible fight with Ono's guy. Now, this is telling it to update that table and set the content, but it's not telling which row to update. We need to tell the database which row to update because we don't want it updating every row with that content, just one row. So how do we find the log to update? Well, we can use the ID like that. If we didn't know the ID, we could also filter by columns that we knew were unique to the log, like user ID and the date. It was 2015 0401. But really, if you know the ID, it's safer because you're not relying on having to filter on columns, which could actually be the same across multiple rows. If you might have a diary app where users are allowed to write multiple logs per day. It really depends on how the app and the tables are designed. I'll go back to the ID since I know the ID. Now we can do another select to see that our table changed. And it did. No more knowledge of those 3 pounds of chocolate. Okay, so the user made that change, but then the user decides that they actually want to delete the entire log entry. Like maybe because they want to forget that they even had that horrible fight. So in that case, we would need to have code to execute a delete. So we can say delete from diary logs where, and once again, I'm going to use the ID because I know it. And let's select again to see what it looks like. Haha! So we only have 1 row left, which means that our delete worked. Now, you should be very careful whenever you're doing update or delete because you want to make sure you're updating the actual rows that you intend to update. You don't want to update the wrong rows or delete the wrong rows and lose that data. In fact, some apps never issues deletes. They never really delete rows. Instead, they add a deleted column to their database, and then they'll do something like deleted equals set deleted to true when the user wants to delete, and then they filter based on deleted equals false in the select queries, something like that. So that means that you never actually delete data, which can be a little bit safer, but it's a little more complicated to do that as well. So anyway, that's up to how you design the app. So now with select and insert and update and delete, you have all of the commands you need to handle what a user would want out of your diary app. And now hopefully you can better imagine which commands are happening behind the scenes when you use your favorite apps every day.
Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. The big thing that I want to emphasize and emphasize and emphasize for one final time is that you never want to forget your where as part of your update or your delete query. Less common to forget it in your delete query, but if you ran this query without the ID equal to 1, it is going to set the content in every single row in your table to whatever content you just typed in there. because it's going, oh, update the content to this. Sure, no problem. You didn't tell me where to update the content, so I'm going to assume that you would like to update the content in every single row in the database. So you need to be really careful when you are writing your update queries to make sure that you do not forget that all critical where statement. It is one thing to select your data and go, oh, whoops, I got too much data back because I forgot my where. It is another to update all the content in your database, which is effectively deleting all the existing content and updating every single row to what you want. There is no edit undo button in SQL. That just is not a thing. You cannot reverse a query like you can in Word or in your text editor when you just hit Control Z or Command Z. So you want to be really careful about what commands you are running. And you also always want to make sure that you have a backup of your database, which is more of a DevOps thing to do. But whenever I am running a big command on my database, before I run that command, I make sure I have the entire database backed up, just to make sure that if my command goes horribly wrong, I know I can roll it back and get that data back. Okay, do we want to take a break to do the challenges, or do we want to play all the videos? I may actually have that as a poll. Let me see if I have that. So if you would like to play all the videos and then do all the projects at the end, vote for one. If you want to stop and work on the exercises, vote for the second one. Seven votes in, and I think 11 students currently in class by my vote. So I'll give you guys one more chance to vote. I shouldn't have given you guys one more chance to vote because we are one vote away from tying it. So give everyone one more chance. Damn it. You guys kill me with tying it. All right, I think I counted 11 students. So if there's one student holding out on the vote, you can be the tiebreaker. Otherwise, I'm going to throw it back to Caitlin, and Caitlin can decide. All right, looks like it's going to be up to Caitlin.
Okay, I'll just pick the opposite, watch them all, and then do the projects at the end.
Okay, sounds good. So we will keep rolling through them. One thing we can decide is if we want to, the challenges will still be homework in here, but we are going to be using these update and delete queries in our app tonight. So we're actually going to get hands-on experience working with them. So I'm kind of leaning towards playing all the videos, getting Khan Academy done and out of the way, and then switching into Let's Get Us in the actual code land. And then I will stop at like 8 o'clock, 8:15 at the very latest, and give everyone a chance to ask any questions or catch up there. But let's just get through all the videos here, get through what we need to in the chat app, and then we can always go back to Khan Academy if someone wants me to talk through one of the challenges.
We're back with the database for our diary app. Now, when we first created these tables, like the diary logs table, we decided to store user ID, date, and content. And now I want you to imagine that a few months after we launched this diary app, a user designer suggests adding a "How are you feeling?" drop down on each diary entry. And the user would say something like happy or sad or confused. In order to store that, we need to add an emotion column to the table. Now, we could just add it like this, but if this was a database for an app in a real production environment, then we couldn't just edit the create statement because that's something that we actually issued months ago and it's already happened. And if we rerun it, it'll actually remove the current data. And we don't want to lose all the data that we've gotten over these many months. So at this point, after we've done create and after we've got data, we're going to need to use the alter table statement. And to use that, we write alter table and then the name of the table, and then add, then the name of the column name we're adding, and then the data type of that new column. Great. So now the next time that the user makes an entry, we'll need to specify that column, or we can specify that column. So let's say, all right, let's say they went to Disneyland, and to specify that new column, we're going to put comma emotion, and then here we'll just say happy. Most people are happy that go there. Okay, so let's see what it looks like now if we select it all. So we can see the latest row has happy in the emotion column, and the row before it has that big old null in it. And that is what databases usually do. They fill in null for unspecified values. If we want, we can actually get it to fill in some other value for rows where it wasn't set, and that's what we think of as the default value for a column. So to do that, if we had wanted to do that, we would have put default and then the value in that alter table statement when we ran it. So now you can see instead of null, we see unknown. So that's an option for you when you're adding a column, and just something to keep in mind, depends what you're adding to the database. Okay, so now let me show you something that you rarely do, deleting an entire table. Maybe I would do this if I migrated all the data out of this table into some new table, or if I just got mad and decided to be a horrible person and take a rampage all over a database. That's bad. But anyway, we can do this using the drop table statement. And now if I try to select, what happens? I actually get an error because my table no longer exists, so it can't select from it. So that was a bad idea, and I'll just delete it. You should think really carefully about dropping tables. Do not just drop them willy-nilly. You should also be careful with alter table, especially if you're running it on a table with a lot of rows, because you can have performance issues there. Really, I don't want to scare you, but you should be careful whenever you're making any changes to your database. With great power comes great responsibility. And now you have both.
So you notice we had alter table there and we used the command add. It is possible to alter table to remove columns entirely. And so whenever we alter a table, we always have to specify the data type, right? It's not like Excel where we can just add another column and start adding values into it. Columns always in SQL are associated with a particular data type. So we can alter tables all sorts of ways, and then we can also drop tables. Now, one thing that she did in this environment was she just deleted the drop table and the table, came back. That will never be the case in a production environment. This is set up as a learning environment to always sequentially run from the top down. However, as soon as you issue a SQL query in a real database, that query is issued. There is no undo query. That always is going through and reflecting in your live data. So the way that they are kind of running these commands from the top down doesn't actually work that way in a real production database. But anyway, there are times that you have to drop tables. There are definitely times that you have to alter tables. We use something called a migration, which is a way that we can maintain our table structures across multiple different kinds of servers. And so the reason we call it a migration is we are migrating from the old table structure over to the new table structure. But that gets out of pure SQL land and gets into more DevOps and how do we maintain databases across several different servers to make sure that they are all structured the same way. So altering tables, very common thing to do. She is right in saying it is very rare that you drop a table. The general rule of thumb is that storage is cheap. And so even if you are moving data into a different table, there's no real issue of leaving that data in the database 9 times out of 10. Yes, it's legacy data. Yes, it's not going to get updated. But if something goes horribly wrong, at least you can always go back to that data. So important to run your database backups and have something that you can get back to. Any questions on the inserts or the alter tables or drop tables? Null is kind of like a placeholder, Carolyn. There's never really, you can think of null as empty. Databases always have to have some kind of value in the column. And if there is not a value, it is null. Null and empty string in databases, two completely separate things, right? And the same goes for JavaScript for that matter. If we say let A equal, or if we just say let A, and then we console log it, right, we're going to get undefined or null. But if we say let A equal empty string, when we, with just quotes and nothing in between it, now when we console log it, we are going to get an empty string out. So null is like one step further than empty string. It is literally, there is nothing there. It is empty. And for whatever reason, databases have a better time of keeping track of null in a column than they do if we just left it empty. And in fact, you can actually specify what the default value is when you create a column. If you do not specify a default value, it will always default to null, unless you do something like a Boolean, where a Boolean can't be null, it has to be true or false. So sometimes, depending on the column, you would specify a default value of false instead of, a default value of null. Okay, I actually think that is it of Khan Academy. There is an article in here about making your SQL safer. Definitely worth reading through that. I'm going to show, let me see if they cover, they do not cover SQL injection in this attack, but they cover some helpful things in here, like we can say limit 1, which is going to make our update query, even if there are multiple things that match in the where, only impact to one row. And we can use that limit statement in a select statement as well. If we only want the first 100 rows or 50 rows or 10 rows that match our query, instead of getting the entire database back in our select, we can just add that limit 1 or limit 10, and we're only going to get 10 rows that match that data. So limit is a helpful thing to do. Transactions, you can read about a little bit in here, but the idea of the transaction is it is going to run all of these statements. And if the first one fails or the second one fails, it will not actually run. It will essentially undo all of the commands that you have run between the transaction. So if you're saying, okay, I would like to update all of these tables, and you get down to the very last update and the update goes, oh no, I can't do that. That's not a valid value or whatever it is. Well, now you're stuck because 10 other update commands before it may have run, and they're now saved into the database. But because your last one failed, now your data may not make sense in the database anymore. So you can do this thing called a transaction where you begin the transaction and then you type out all of your commands here with a semicolon, and then finally you commit that transaction. And when you commit it, it's going to go through, it's going to run through all of those lines. And if any of those lines fail, it's going to roll it back to what it was trying to do before. And that should be fine. Making backups, what I talked about before of, making sure you can get back to where your data was. And then replication is an interesting notion in databases of what happens if one of my database servers goes down. I don't want my whole site to go down. So it's a little different than a backup, because a backup is something that you can tell the database, hey, wipe whatever you have, pull in this data. Replication is two database servers running at the exact same time. So whenever you run an insert statement, it is going to run it on the first one, and then it is also going to run it on the second one. So it is an idea of backing up, but it's two identical servers always running the same commands. And because they're always running the same commands, they're always in sync. So replication can be a way to scale your application. It also is a way to make it more performant, because now you could split the load across two different servers. So replication, kind of a concept only in databases. We don't talk about like replicating backend servers, but the way we talk about having multiple database servers is replication. Privileges is this notion of, am I allowed to run this command? In a database, it is possible to give someone a user account that can only run select queries and can't insert new data. So there are all kinds of different privileges, and you can actually do that at the table level. So you can say, hey, this user, has access to update the messages table, but they don't have access to update the users table. We don't want them to be able to add new users, but we do want them to have the ability to edit the table. When we talk about privileges at the database level, we're not ever talking about an end user. We're talking about, do you have the privilege to actually run this SQL command? And that's pretty much it. Any questions on SQL before we get our database set up? Okie doke. I am going to send you guys two links. The first is called Postgres.app. If you are not using your Mac, you are pretty screwed for tonight's lesson. I probably should have thought of that in advance as a little warning for you guys. But Postgres is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to send you that link. Ignore the Postgres link. I meant to send you the Postgres app. Look at how similar their sites are and tell me it is easy mistake to swap those two. So the Postgres app is actually going to be a user interface that you can use to get your first Postgres server running on your computer. Because it is a server, it is going to be running on a where do we run servers? What's the number called that a server runs at? Port, exactly, yeah. And so it's going to run on localhost, but the port is the specific number that we are going to run it at on our localhost. So by default, Postgres runs on port 5432. And that's just the port we will use. There's no reason in changing that. Kyle, it would be better for you. You are definitely going to want to run the server and the coding on your Mac. And so if you want to join the Zoom call on whatever other device you have, that is fine. You probably won't need to be sharing your screen at any point tonight. But if you want to do it on the same device, that is also fine. Okay, so Postgres.app is the first app we will be using. If you head to that website and go to the downloads page, there is a latest release. This is the page that loads. If you go to downloads and click the download button, that is going to download a disk image for you. If you click on that disk image, it is going to open and verify and pop open something like this. We are not going to double click on Postgres here. We are going to run into all kinds of problems if we run Postgres from the disk image. So what we are going to do is drag and drop it into our applications folder. then I'm going to figure out where you guys went because I cannot see you all of a sudden, and I don't know what I did to anger the Zoom gods. Maybe if I stop sharing my screen, you'll come back. There you are. Okay. Go ahead and get Postgres downloaded. It may take a minute. While it is doing that, we are also going to grab software called Beekeeper Studio. And I will send you the link to that in Slack as well. Carolyn, I will get to you in 1 second. Beekeeper Studio, you can Google it or click the link in Zoom. We are going to click download for Mac OS. And that disk image is also going to download and look something like this. And it looks like this. And we are going to install it the same way. Just drag and drop it into our applications folder.
Oh, okay.
So Postgres and Beekeeper Studio are both installed the same way by just dragging and dropping it into our applications folder. Once you have both of those downloaded and in the applications folder, you're going to go back to your Finder, and we are going to eject that disk image that got mounted. So we are going to eject those two just so we don't accidentally open it from there. And I will start a poll to see if you guys made it through that.
Excuse me, Matt.
Yep.
You're saying that the disk should just pop up on its own. We shouldn't be clicking on it at all to get that to pop up, or we are clicking on it?
No, if it didn't pop up automatically, you can click on the .dmg file and it should come up with a little window that says mounting, and then it should show you the thing where you can drag and drop it.
Got it. Thank you.
So what no one tells you on the Mac is that a .dmg file is supposed to act as if it were a disk. So this goes all the way back to the days of like installing software from CDs or even back to floppy disks, where when you open that DMG file, the Mac is effectively saying, oh, a CD was inserted, and that CD happens to be called Beekeeper Studio, and this is what is in that CD. And so that's why we drag it over to our applications folder. That's what's copying it onto our hard drive. And then we want to eject the disk, as in like pop out the floppy disk or remove the CD, just so we don't accidentally run it from that virtual CD or that virtual disk. So if you have everything rocking and rolling, you should see something similar to this. So it's going to say Postgres SQL, probably version 11. And then we're going to have something in Beekeeper Studio where we have like a connection type and we can connect. And if anyone has questions or is not getting this, feel free to let me know. I am really annoyed that when I'm screen sharing, I can normally see you guys, and Zoom has decided that my little hovering view of all of you is just going to disappear tonight. Ha, found you. Once the apps are in your applications folder, you want to open both of them from the applications folder. And that should hopefully give you something that looks like this and like this. Got 5 people with votes in, so give you guys a couple minutes. Feel free to shout out questions if you are stuck anywhere.
I have a question. Sorry, can you hear me? My AC just
Yes.
blazed on. So now I have it. It says Postgres running. It's a little window, and there's like 3. They look like barrels. One says Postgres, one says Susan Bader, and one says template 1. And the Postgres is highlighted. Should I just leave that and I'm all set?
Perfect. You're good to go there. You can go over to Beekeeper Studio.
Okay. And
I can't show every step of the process, unfortunately, because we use Postgres at work. So for me to uninstall Postgres on my computer would probably be like a 4-hour event of trying to get it all back because of all the data in Postgres. And because Postgres is installed system wide, there's no easy way for me to like just create a new user account and show that. So if you see a stop button up here and a start button, you can click on start. If stop is your only option, it's fine to leave it running. And then yeah, seeing 3 databases down here is pretty normal.
Oh, but I closed that window. Should I have kept it open, that little guy?
Yeah, go ahead and keep that open.
Okay.
And you can click initialize if that is an option for you.
Excuse me, Max.
Yep.
I have Postgres SQL 13, the little dialog box that you're showing with 11.
That's fine. No major differences
Oh.
between 11, 12, or 13 that we will be using tonight.
So my choice, server settings or initialize.
Go ahead and hit initialize.
Okay, thank you.
And let
It's
me know
got-
what happens after initialize.
Yeah, it's got my name, then it has Postgres and template 1.
Perfect. You are
And
good to
then-
go. Don't have to worry about anything there.
Then I over to my apiary, my bees. Where'd they go? Where'd my beekeeper stuff go? And that, I think it looks just like yours does, so I don't do anything else in that yet, right?
Yep, you're good to go.
Wonderful. Good. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
looks like we have 10 people in, so unless anyone is stuck,
I have a
we
quick
will
question.
continue.
I have a question. Matt.
Shoot.
So
Shoot.
in my Beekeeper Studio, I have to click connect, but I don't have, or it might be just because you've been using yours, but I don't have anything in like my recent. That makes sense that I don't have anything.
Yep,
Okay.
you don't have to worry about anything there.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we are going to do is it says select a connection type. And Beekeeper Studio is kind of unique in that it supports a lot of different kinds of databases. So when I pop mine open, we see we've got MySQL and Postgres, which are probably the 2 most common free open source variations of a SQL database. But we've got all kinds of other options in here. SQL Server is what Microsoft uses, so that is Microsoft SQL. We have SQLite, which is what we were using in Khan Academy. And that is a quick, easy way to spin up a database without having a giant server running with it. But because we have Postgres installed, we are going to click Postgres. And it is going to give us all kinds of different connection options. Now, there are normally 4 pieces of information you need to connect to a database. 4.5. The host, right? So we're using localhost because that is our computer. We're not going out to the internet to connect to a server. We're just looking at our own computer. And the port. And the host and the port go hand in hand, which is why I say 4.5. We don't need to change anything on 5432 because that's where Postgres gets started. We have our username and our password. We can leave those blank because by default, Postico says, look, I will just, if you're connecting to your own computer, you don't need a username and password. If we were to deploy this to a server, we would probably set up our username and password just to make sure that not anyone could connect into our database. And then finally, we have the default database. And what Postico does for us is it creates a database using whatever our Mac username is. So if I go up to Apple up at the top, it says log out Max Matthews. I know my Mac username is Max Matthews. If you do not know what it is, you can go over to Postico and whatever the name is on one of those databases that looks like your username, that's what we want to connect to. So I'm going to come back over to my default database and I am going to type in Max Matthews. And then I am going to hit the test button, and hopefully you should get a connection looks good. And if the connection looks good, go ahead and hit connect. So the only thing we changed on that screen, we set it to Postgres, and then we dropped in Max Matthews or whatever your Mac username is. Hopefully your Mac username is not Max Matthews. I would have more concerns then. But go ahead and type in your username, and you should get into this madness in here. Gonna relaunch the poll. Make sure everyone is at this point. And if you have gotten to this point, congratulations. You not only have set up your first database server, you have also connected to your database for the first time. Other than cheating in Khan Academy, which is kind of cheating, kind of not.
Max?
Yep.
I got to bring it up again. Let's see here. I have, I put in my name, and then it has the default database is my name, and then it has SSH tunnel,
Go ahead and leave that off and hit test.
and then hit test. And when I do, I get this little error message, error establishing a connection down the bottom in orange.
Okay, go ahead and
Oh,
share
it
your
says
screen.
it doesn't exist. Maybe I need to use my full name. Try this. That might be all it is. Nope.
Go ahead and share your screen, Carolyn. Okay, so if we go over to Postico,
Or Postgres?
I'm sorry, Postgres.
No, it's okay. I just want to be sure I'm in the right spot.
No. Thank you for the correction. So it's
No,
showing
I'm-
your name right there as Carolyn Sprague.
Oh, Sprague. Yeah.
Sprague, sorry.
Oh, lowercase and one. Okay.
You got it. So that's what we want to be using over in Beekeeper Studio.
That explains everything.
Carolyn, you have to go up one input to where it says user.
Oh, no. She's
Oh.
right there. It should be in default database.
Oh, really?
The database name that it creates kind of confusingly is your database name. And then you don't need a username or password because we're connecting locally.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're
so-
cool. You're watching out for me. It looks like I'm good. So unless I missed a step, I can mute myself here.
Go ahead and hit connect, and then you're good to go.
Yep. Connect and then stop sharing screen and mutate. Thank you.
Interesting.
And if you're wondering where I'm pulling these settings from, they are all on the Postgres app. If we go back to the introduction and I share my screen, you can see what they have created for us. They technically say we can use our username as whatever our system username is, but we can just leave it blank. I believe it allows either. And then it's saying you're going to connect on localhost, your port's 5432, and then the database we're connecting to is the same as the user. All right, we've got 9 votes in. I had 10 on the last one, so I'm going to give people one more chance. Okay, we are at 10. So I am going to keep going there. So while we have our database that we are connected to that happens to be our username, we don't really want to use that, right? It would be kind of weird if we just started using a database because we want to keep our project separate. So what I am going to do is I am going to kill Zoom for keeping on moving my video panel. I've never had it do that. It's driving me crazy tonight. Okay. What we are going to do is we are going to create our first database other than the default one that is provided for us. So we didn't cover this in Khan Academy, but can anyone guess what the create database command is going to be?
Create database.
Oh, brilliant. All right,
That's
let's create a
so
database.
counterintuitive, Max.
And I'm going to call it messages 1. And the reason I'm throwing a 1 on there is just because we may be creating multiple databases. I don't think we're going to be for this project, but just in case, just to play it safe, I'm going to create my database messages run. So I'm going to hit the run button, and we should see query executed successfully, no results. So what that is basically saying is that it created a database for me, but it's like a whole entire database, right? It's not like there are going to be any results coming back. It's not like a select statement. Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually a little counterintuitive. I am going to close my Beekeeper Studio and then go back down and reopen it. And that is going to load it back up, and it's going to get us back to our connection screen. So we are going to repeat that over again. We're going to connect to Postgres, but now as the default database we're connecting to, we are going to connect to messages 1. And then we are going to hit our connect button, and we should be in. Okay, so we're in our database, but we can't really do anything in our database because we don't have any tables. We could run something called select now and hit the run button, and we see we get a result of the current time. And that's a good test that you can run just to see if you're connected to your database, because even without any tables, the database server can return back some information like the current time. So running a select now, and if we hit the run button again, we should see that time update. Okay, that's cool. But in order to store some data in the database, where are we going to store it? In a table. You got it, Shaw. So we are going to use the create table command, and we are going to call this table messages. Okay, and messages is going to have a couple different columns. So remember when I said SQLite has a couple data types that are different than Postgres? This is where we're going to start to run into that a little bit. So if you do a search for Postgres data types, there is going to be a documentation page that comes up right from Postgres's website that is about 40 pages long and is practically a book. And the reasoning behind that is data types are something that you want to be very careful when you're setting up your database to be using the right type. So we are going to start out with an ID, because ID is something that almost every database table has. It's the way that we can relate our data from one table to the next and do our joins and do all of that stuff. So we are going to use a command, and remember how we did like primary key, integer, auto increment, all of that stuff? Postgres has a much easier way of saying that. We can just say serial, and serial, they go, all right, we figured it out. You create IDs all the time. We will do the auto increment for you. We will set that as the primary key for you. We know that it's an integer number, all of that stuff. Carolyn, I'll let you share your screen in 1 second when we get through this. So I'm going to do a comma, and I am a line break fan. I like hitting my return and going down to the next line. You could put this all on one line if you wanted to. Next, I am going to say, all right, well, if we have our messages probably have some content with them. Can anyone guess what the type is going to be for our content? Text. You got it. We could technically make that a string or a varchar, but those are limited to 255 characters. So we make that jump. There's a differentiation in JavaScript, right? In JavaScript, we just have our string, and it doesn't matter how long the string is. Well, the database optimizes a little differently. So they're saying if you have something that truly has an unlimited text length, you should use text. But if you're just storing something like first name, the database stores that better in a string or a varchar, depending on what variation of SQL you're using, because it knows that it has a max length with it. So we're just going to do our content in our text. Well, we also want a timestamp of when our messages has been sent. Can anyone guess what type I'm going to use for that? So I'm not going to use a string. I am actually going to use a time because the database is optimized to store times. Now, there is something called date. There is something called date time, and there is another one called timestamp. And timestamp is going to be smart and automatically drop in some values there. So whenever we create that row, that timestamp is going to show up. And then the last thing I am going to store is our received bool. And a Boolean, true or false. So I'm going to drop down. I'm going to use my little semicolon. Dominique, we wouldn't use when because when is a reserved word in JavaScript for kind of, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of where. I need more coffee. 7 o'clock's coming up, right? Sorry. No, you're good. You're good. So timestamp, date, time, all of that. Let me just pull up while I'm here. If we just do a search for Postgres data types, they've got some documentation here, and I'm not kidding. This is just the index of all the different kinds of data types that they support. So lots of different information in here. But if we jump down to our date time types, we can see that they support things like timestamp and also things like date or just time. So all different kinds of data types that we can support here. That will start to be less overwhelming when we get into Sequelize, our ORM, which I believe is not going to be until tomorrow. But if we are kicking ass and taking names tonight, we may get to that tonight. So we'll see where we're at. I will copy and paste some of the commands here into the pasted code channel in case you're a little behind.
Next, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I hate to ask if you already said it, but what is a varchar?
A varchar is just another kind of a string. And so databases happen to call them varchars. Variable characters is what they stand for. But every database has slightly different names for it. The beauty is that Sequelize is our object relational mapper. And that is what allows us to write our JavaScript code and wire up our ORM to any kind of SQL database. So we could say, all right, we're going to use Postgres or MySQL or any of that. And the ORM does the magic of mapping all the data types to the data types that the database uses actually under the hood. So we are rolling with Postgres data types here, but there is a list that I will share with you when we get to the ORM of the shorter list of data types that Sequelize supports, and you'll start to be able to see the differences between them. So I wouldn't worry too much about the data types right now, other than the fact that, hey, there are certain data types that we have to use to store that data in the most efficient manner. I am going to run this command, and I should get my query executed successfully, no results. But you notice over on the left here, we have a messages table. Hey, that's pretty cool. We're going to explore that in 1 second after I paste in this code. I'm also going to paste in for Ariel and Sarah, who are just joining us because they were ahead on the Khan stuff, and then we ended up doing the Khan Academy stuff sooner. Those are the two applications that we downloaded. So if you download them, open the DMG, and just drag them over, that should get you caught up. And then we connected in Beekeeper Studio, and the only thing that we changed was our default database, and we set our default database over to whatever our username was, and then ran the SQL commands in the pasted code channel. Okay, so over on the left here, we should be able to pop open our messages and see now our ID. And it happened based off of that serial format to know that we were going to use an int. That 4 there is basically saying how big the integer can get, how many bytes it's going to take up. Probably a little more technical than what we need to get into. We've got our content, which is our text, our timestamp. That 6 in parentheses is again telling us how big our timestamp can be. I know that's a little weird, but when you get into, do we support milliseconds or nanoseconds, and is the database big enough to be able to support those little differences in time? Again, more complicated than we need to get. And then it's got our received Boolean. So I'm going to take a quick stop there and make sure, actually, I'm going to do 2 more steps and then I will take a stop and answer any questions you may have. So we've got our create table, but just a table, right? We need data in it. So what are we going to use to get data into our new table? Insert. Yep, we're going to use our insert into, and we are going to insert it into our messages. And then it's always best practice to tell it what columns we want to insert data into. We can technically skip this, but it's always good to have your column names there just to make sure you're lining up your data with it. So we want to add content, our timestamp, and whether or not it was received or not. And so once we add our columns in, let's just break this up so we have our different lines. We need to tell it we are going to add some values in, and the values we are going to add is my, I'm going to use single quotes here, my first database insert. And then we are going to add the timestamp. And remember that now command that we used? We can actually use that here as well and say, hey, grab whatever the current time is, dump it into our database. And then we'll say it wasn't received, meaning we are sending this message for the first time. So you'll find that when you click this run button, it's going to yell at us and say error relationship messages already exists. Well, of course it already exists. We're trying to insert some data into it. What it's doing is it's also running my create table command as well. We don't want it to run that. We want it to only run our insert. So I'm going to throw a semicolon at the end of this. I'm going to highlight just my insert messages command. And now you notice my button now says run selection. So I'm going to click on that and I get my query executed successfully, no results. Okay, prove it. Select star from messages. Going to highlight just that. I'm going to run it. And voila, I've got a message. Okay, great. SQL is also maxed. I totally get it. I'm totally rocking with you, but I want to see my data without having to write any SQL. Well, fine, be like that. Just double click on messages and we will pop open our messages table and see our data right in it. Okay, I'm actually stopping there. I'm going to copy and paste this all into Slack. I would encourage you not to copy and paste this code from Slack into your database and actually practice typing it. We are creating our table. We are inserting our first row into the table, and then we are selecting our table and also making sure we can see our data by just double clicking on the messages over on the left. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to kick off a poll. And I will let anyone ask questions. Latonia, we're not going to be spending too much more time in Beekeeper Studio because we want to switch over to Node and get everything wired up. It is possible. There's probably a keyboard shortcut. Yeah, if you hit Command Shift Enter, it is going to run your current SQL command. And you know what's current because there's kind of that little, it like looks like it's highlighted, but it's not actually highlighted. So if you hit Command Shift and Enter, that is what's going to execute just where your cursor is instead of having to highlight it. But the highlighting trick is a good thing to know either way.
Hi, Max. Just a show, how did you get the console after you selected the insert, the 4 lines, and you hit the run selection, and then you did a select the kind of terminal thing? How did you get there?
Yeah, so as soon as you run the select star from messages, it should pop open.
I don't see that as a query executed successfully, no results.
Okay, make sure you've got a semicolon at the end of your insert. And then make sure that when you're running the select star from messages, that you've got that selected. And then if you hit run selection, it should pop it open.
Oh, no.
If it is not, go ahead and share your screen and I can take a look.
Oh, thank you.
Brandy, if you're getting an error that it's already existing, you just want to highlight your insert command and then your run button will turn into run selection. And that should make it work. So Shaw, all we need to do is at the end, add a select star from messages.
Okay. Type it.
Yep, you're good.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
And yep, you got it.
Oh, thank you.
And then you don't want to run both of them, just run your select star, because otherwise it's going to insert another message every time you run it from messages. Okay, now, yep, highlight and run selection. And now you can see you actually ran the insert 6 different times, but that's fine.
Thank you.
If you wanted to, you could practice either dropping the whole table and recreating it, or you could practice your delete from messages where ID is greater than 1 if you wanted to play around with that data. Okay.
Thank you.
So, any other questions?
Hey, Max.
Yep.
I was just curious if we're saving the query.
No, we don't have to save the query. We'll practice writing more and more queries just so we can get a handle on all of this.
Okay.
But we are going to switch over to writing queries somewhere else quite soon. But Beekeeper Studio, the reason I tell you guys about this tool is that we want to be able to sometimes look at our database and know that our database is the data in the database is fine and it's our actual code that's breaking it, right? So we've talked about debugging in our front end and when something isn't working in the front end. We started talking a little bit about debugging in the back end, right? And starting to add our console.logs, especially in the add example of figuring out, all right, is that an issue with the data coming in or is that an issue with the data going back or where is that problem? We are now adding in that third layer of complexity of, well, the data could be wrong on the front end and it's not sending it right. It could be wrong on the back end where it's like maybe not parsing it out or the headers aren't set or something like that. Or it could be wrong in the database itself. And so we can't really add a console log into our database, right? We can't like debug the database, but we kind of can. And the way we debug the database is a tool like Beekeeper Studio, where we can run SQL queries and check it out, or just pop open the table and take a look at it. Carolyn, you have questions?
Yeah, couple things. Let's see. I have the create table insert into and all that, but over on the left with my directory of files and folders.
Yep.
There is nothing public that contains messages, etc. So I must have missed a step.
Yeah, can you share your screen?
Sure.
So if you highlight create table, 1 all the way down to line 6, sorry.
Oh, that section, gotcha.
Yep. And then hit run selection there.
Excuse me, I've got lots of things in the way here. I've got to go back. Something else popped up. Please bear with me. All right, sorry. Here we go.
Okay, so you have a syntax error at end of input. Well, that isn't particularly helpful. It is probably because
I think you accidentally highlighted the word insert.
oh, try again.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Picky little thing, isn't it?
Okay, and
Yeah,
now
that's better.
your table has run and you have your table
Oh.
over on the left. So you want
Yeah.
to continue running those commands. So you're going to highlight your insert into all the way down until the end of line 10.
Oh, no, just the insert, not select.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And then
And-
run that selection. And now you've got a timestamp does not exist. I don't know what a timestamp is.
Oh, it's something out of Back to the Future.
Oh, before you hit run, now it is running your create tables query again. So we want to highlight out line 7 through 10 again.
Very specific. It's very literal. Okay.
And go ahead. Oh,
I thought I maybe highlighted that last line by mistake. So
okay, now your query executed successfully. So we don't panic with no results because an insert statement in Postgres does not return any data. So now we want to see if our data is in there. So go ahead and highlight your final line on line 11.
should there be spaces between the three of them?
Up to you.
Okay.
Doesn't really matter. SQL doesn't care. And now there's our data down at the bottom.
Huh.
And if we double click on the messages table over on the left,
Just at the top level?
yep, we can actually see all of our data in there. And so while you're in there, there's actually a filter up at the top that can be super helpful instead of having to write out a complicated where query, we can actually use that filter. But I'm going to save demoing that for a little later once we've got our data in
I'm
the
just
database.
curious where, oh, I see it. Never mind. This Zoom is like taking over the world. Go away. All right. I think I'm good then, because I was thinking I missed some. Was there some other thing we were doing with messages, or is
Nope,
that it?
that's it. You're caught
And
up.
I'm good. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Ariel and Sarah, were you able to catch up? Sorry, I ended up going way faster than I thought during the Khan Academy stuff.
I'm just downloading those onto my MacBook right now with Beekeeper, and I got the Postgres right now.
Cool.
So I'm catching up, but I can always watch after tonight, so I'm good.
Cool. And good work, Sarah. We've got a break coming up in 20 minutes. So Ariel, if you need help, I can help you then too. Okay, so we've got our database set up. And if you want to, you can practice around running some insert queries or creating a different table or playing around. But this is all cool. We have it working on our computer, but like we've got 2/3 of our stack over here in Node, and we just are missing that final part. So wouldn't it be nice if we could tie together our Node code, because our front end code almost will never connect to a database directly. Web front ends almost never talk to the database. What they do is talk to the back end. The back end talks to the database. The back end gets the data from the database. It may format the data from the database or, change it, and then it sends it back to the front end. So even though it's the front end sending the message, it's got to go through our back end. Our back end then sends that query to the database. The database saves whatever that query is doing, sends some data back to the back end, and then the back end sends the response back to the front end. Okay, all of that's cool. We are going to jump in and get that going. So I am going to pop open, close out some of this stuff. I'm going to go to my projects, and I'm going to pop open the classroom repo and go into cohort 2 module 7, even though I know we are in module 8 right now. Grab week 1 day 4 And I am going to grab both our chat backend and our chat front end, because we are going to basically copy these now into module 8. So I'm going to grab both of those folders.
Wait, you're not screen sharing. Are we supposed to be seeing you? Yes.
So I am in, sorry, let me back out. I'm in the classroom code base folder, cohort 2, module 7, week 1, day 4, chat backend. Let me see if I can fit all
Is
of that
there
on my
anything we
screen.
need to pull down from GitHub, or are we good?
No, as long as you're up to date within the past week or so, you shouldn't have to pull. If you haven't pulled in the past week, it probably is not a bad idea to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So I am grabbing both my chat backend and my chat front end folders. I'm going to copy them as our starting point, and I'm going to go all the way to my code folder. I'm going to create a new folder for module 8. I'll create a folder in there called day 4. Whatever your organization system is, if you add week numbers or whatever, that's fine. But I'm going to then save my chat backend and front end. I'm going to paste in there. So I hit Command V. You're welcome to right click paste. Either of those will work just fine. So now that I'm in here, I'm going to use a shortcut. I'm primarily going to be working in the back end, but I do need both of them open because I'm going to be starting our front end server so we can actually test through that. So I'm going to grab my chat backend folder, and if we just drag and drop it onto the VS Code in our doc, what you will find, if you don't go too slowly when you're doing that, is that it will pop open the folder for us right in VS Code. So I'm just going to hit yes, I trust the authors, and I have my server code that we were working with before. Okay, I'm going to keep this on the right half of my screen, and I'm going to pop open my chat front end the same exact way. And then I'm going to right click. I'm going to open an integrated terminal. And because we copied those files, and I don't know what the state of my node modules is, I'm just going to run a quick npm I or npm install. And that's going to look at our packages.json file and pull in anything that I need. So I'm also going to come over here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to open an integrated terminal. And I'm also going to npm I. And that is also going to install whatever packages we need in the backend as well. So in theory, I should be able to run my npx nodemon server.js, and that should fire up my server on port 3001. And then we will wait until React gets its crap together in installing, and then we will be able to run that as well. So while React is taking its sweet time, we can get started over here. So we've got our messages array, but I'm actually going to delete that out because we're going to be saving our messages in the database. So I'm going to delete my messages. I'm going to blow up my text because I know you guys will ask for that in 1 second. Whoa, not that much. Okay. Okay. Then I'm going to comment out wherever I use that messages object, because we're going to have to rebuild that with the database. So I'm going to comment out my messages there. I'm going to comment out my messages there. Both of these get commented out, and my delete also gets commented out as well. So we've got some ground to cover because we had all 4 of those working, but whenever we rebooted the server, it didn't work. It cleared out the data. So now we want to get that database in our data so it's saving. So I'm going to save that file, going to make sure it starts up without any errors. I missed one comment out there. Okay, now I'm going to come over here, and because it's my React code, I'm going to npm start. And hopefully that is going to pop open my front end. Okay, and I've got my front end all loaded up and no messages. Well, that makes sense. We haven't gotten our back end connected. So we're going to leave our front end be for a second. And Kyle, in answer to your question, yes, you should be doing this in your personal folder. Just copy out whatever you have in the classroom into your personal folder. And if your personal folder is already caught up, feel free to use that code instead of the code in the classroom repo. So I am going to come over here, and I've got to get my database connected. So what we are going to do is we're going to stop our server, and we're going to run npm i-s, because you always want to save whatever you're installing. And I am going to install this tiny little, well, what looks like to be a tiny little package called PG. PG stands for Postgres, and it is the package that we use to get our node talking to our Postgres server. So I'm going to npm i-spg, and I will dump that in Slack. Okay. And now that we have it started, I'm going to go back to my npx nodemon server.js to restart the server, because whenever we install a package, we've got to restart the server. And then I'm going to start to get fancy on my connection. So what I'm going to do is the first thing I need to do, we're going to let Express get set up and use the body parser and all of that stuff. But we're going to pull in a client, and we're going to pull that in from our PG package from npm. And then once we have the client, we actually need to establish the client. Like, we need to get the connection working. So I'm going to say const db is equal to a new client. All right, that client is coming in from up here, and that's coming from our npm package. And we've got to tell the client what database to connect to. So we're going to say, hey, use our username that came in from Postgres. And we are also going to connect in to a database called messages1. Now, normally you would also pass a password here. You could pass the port here, and you could pass the host here. But because we are using all the defaults, all we need to do is pass in really the database. Passing in the username might be overkill as well. Now, you might be saying, Max, how do you know all of these things, almighty powerful one? And the answer is totally not that I pre-wrote this code earlier today. The answer is that I could go to the documentation, and the documentation would be providing me all of this information. And just to prove that, if I do an npm search for PG, I'm going to get the PG package that we are using that has over 2 million weekly downloads. I'm going to click through the documentation. I'm going to go to connecting, and you will see in connecting, it can show us all the different information that it can take in: username, host, database, password, and the port number itself. Okay, so we've got our DB connected, I think, I hope. Well, we need to tell it to connect. So what we are going to do is we are going to say client, I'm sorry, we're going to say database, go connect. I set it up so there's a client that we connect through, but we need to actually run that connect. Okay, so I'm going to save. I start my database server up, and I have no errors, but I also don't have anything different. Not feeling good. I don't know if my connection worked or not. So what I am going to do is I am going to go to my DB, and I am going to run a query. Now, we've got our messages in there, but that may be going too hard too fast. So what I am going to do is I am going to do a select, and I'm going to use that now trick that I talked about before, right? I'm just going to select the time. And what that's going to do is that's going to give us a callback. And that callback is going to have an error, and then it's going to have a response. And that response isn't what we're sending to the front end. That response is what's coming back from the database. So I am going to console log out my response and save. And now in the database, we've got all of this good stuff coming back, but we see this thing called rows, and our rows has a now, and that timestamp looks just like it did in Beekeeper Studio. So What we have proven here is not only did we connect to the database using the Postgres client from the PG package, but we have run our first SQL query in Node through that client to get to our Postgres server that we are running, and our Postgres server sent us back that timestamp information that we were looking for. Okay, that's a lot. So I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna dump this in the pasted code channel. And I am going to continue to share my screen. I will let anyone jump in if they have questions, and I'm going to kick off the poll as well. And again, the end result we're looking for is in our console. We see rows. You may have to scroll up a little bit, but we see that rows that has now and the time.
Hello, Matt.
Yes.
Can I share my screen so you can look at my server code and see if I forgot to comment something out?
Go for it.
Can you see it okay?
Now I can. Go for it.
Okay. So in here, this is everything we just put in, right?
Huh? Did you remember to, you're going to hate me, save
Why?
your file?
I'm so sorry. Is that what it was? Oh my goodness. Okay, thanks.
I'm telling you, VS Code, I've never worked with a text editor that was more finicky at saving a file. Like, I swear I'd hit Command S. Like, I know I hit Command S and it just does not want to save for me. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, you guys have seen me going through and like, I dive into this whole debugging diatribe of like, let's talk through our code and figure out where it's broken. Oh, it's broken because I'm a dumbass and forgot to hit the save button. I mean, sorry, I get sassy on Wednesdays, just trying to get over that hump. Sure, go ahead and share your screen.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, all of that looks good there. Let's scroll up in the terminal and see what the error message is. Scroll up a little bit more for me. Ew. Well, that's not a particularly helpful server error message, is it? Let me see what command you run. Click in the terminal and then just hit up and enter.
Oh, nothing. No. NPII?
No, you're gonna want your npx nodemon server.js.
Did I do that? Oh, might have done it by mistake on the front end. Do I need to end this? Close the server?
No, you should be able to run it right there. There you go. Oh, there you almost go. Okay, so it did connect to the database. Keep going up. Keep going, keep going. You might have to go a little faster scrolling, but eventually you'll see something that doesn't look like an error message. And it's going to have our results from the database. There it is.
Oh.
And it's got our rows. If you scroll up just a tiny bit more. Yeah, you got our rows and our now. So your database is connected, but now it's just cranky with you because on line 17 and in other places, it is referencing a messages. And it's like, what the heck is messages? I don't know what messages is. So I went through and I commented out wherever I was using the messages. So you can either go through and comment all of those out, and there are probably 4 or 5 lines that use them. And then that should get rid of your error messages.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, thanks.
All right, I only have 5 responses in the poll. So if you are still working, go for it. If you have questions, feel free to jump in. I know I covered a lot in that stint. Brielle, you can open up your localhost 3001. Just make sure you are doing that with your npm start in the chat front end folder. And that should pop open localhost. I'm sorry, that should open localhost 3000, which is going to be your front end. 3001 is going to be working in the server. But because we already have our front end code working with all of our fetches and all of that stuff to 3001, we don't need it open in its own browser tab. If you have it working, you can go on break. I'm waiting until more people have some feedback for me before I officially let everyone go on break. So giving everyone a couple minutes, but if it is working, feel free to run. We will take at least a 15-minute break, probably longer. Ariel, I can catch you up if you want. Just share your screen and I can go through it with you because it will probably be a good recap for everyone else as well.
It's definitely on the MacBook versus the PC. That's why I didn't share screen to ask. Yeah, this is on the PC. So I figured worst case scenario, I'll pop the video once it's posted because it says on YouTube.
Yeah, the getting the Postgres server
pained on that, yeah.
Yeah, getting the Postgres server running on Windows is like infinitely harder than getting Postgres running on the Mac.
No, it's on my Mac. The Zoom is on YouTube.
Oh, gotcha.
So the share screen is totally different. That's all.
Gotcha.
But
okay.
I have no problem rewatching this immediately after. That's all.
Cool. Okay.
Yep. you're good. So keep moving forward for my end. I don't know about the other. Yeah, you're good.
No problem, Carolyn. Not a problem to watch the video. If you are even right now going through and rewatching the video, I'm happy to answer any questions or if you get stuck anywhere, but also completely fine to wait till the end of class and catch up then.
Max, I just am not as quick as I used to be.
Oh,
I
no problem.
I used to be too quick was the problem. So I'm like, oh, what do you do? Where when I'm so I'm glad we have videos because it's just, but you're awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem. All right, I'm gonna stretch my legs. We will say let's take a break and be back at 7:15. You guys want a longer break? 7:15 good for everyone? Okay, cool. Break, see you at 7:15. Anyone has questions, I am back, so feel free to shout them out. Kyle, 2 weeks ago, we lost power like Monday night and didn't get it back until Friday because our service line blew. And it was like the electric company came out and they were like, oh yeah, it's your stuff that's broken, not ours. Like, you've got to fix it. And then it took like an entire week to get an electrician out just to run a temporary line. So I feel your pain on power being out.
And actually, it wasn't the power, it's just the internet, but apparently it's back on now. I just got a text from my parents, so
Oh,
it
nice.
should be good for tomorrow night.
Cool.
We've been having all kinds of internet stuff too. I keep getting internet unstable. My husband and son are working on an Ethernet and they're still having problems. So it's not our Wi-Fi. And it's been like that for a couple of weeks. So I don't know. We all might have to have Spectrum out, right? Do you have Spectrum, Kyle?
Yeah, that's all that's available in Casanova, so.
Yeah. So I don't know. They're building some new houses too. And whenever there's changes like that in the neighborhood, something weird happens. So I figure.
The Comcast guy came out the day we started having the electrical problems, before we knew like the entire electrical system was a problem. And the guy was like, I can't figure it out. Like, you've got a great connection, and I run my tester and it's all fine. And I like turn my head and look back down and it's out again. Like, we're not touching any of the wires. How, like, what is broken here? And so he goes down to where the wire comes off the pole and like connects into the house. And he goes, oh my God, your cable is smoking. I'm like, what? And he goes, there's literally smoke coming off your cable. Our electric system was so out of balance that it was just dumping excess power into the cable line. And the cable line was getting so hot with all of that electricity in it, it was burning off the rubber coating of where the cable connected. And it was like, ooh, boy. Fortunately, that is all now resolved, but I just remember saying, I think it was resolved last Monday. And I was just so nervous for teaching. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to teach at a library and be like whispering, and like, it's going to be a whole nightmare. But fortunately, it all worked out. No, not the library being the nightmare, just, teaching out of one.
Yeah, no, you just rent a room or whatever. And libraries are noisy places these days. But that is really scary, Max. I mean, like, holy mackerel. We lost phone service years and years ago when you had the phone that plugs in the wall. We still have one, but a squirrel had eaten through our phone line back in Syracuse. That's scary though. Oh, yikes.
Oh yeah. My mom was like, what did the cable guy do? Like, there are lights flickering on and off and all kinds of things going on. Like, she thought he like nicked one of the power lines.
Yeah.
And I came up and she goes, I'm not sure what's going on. And the voltage, I've got my whole computer system on a UPS. So it's got its own battery, its own backup, its own all of that. And the voltage has a little display on it. And the voltage went from 65 to 150 and then back down to 120. And I'm like, oh, that is not good.
That is dangerous.
And as soon as I went downstairs, an outlet sparked. And I'm like, okay, we're done here. We're literally pulling the breaker. Like, this is enough.
Well, when we bought this house, of course, we had Petruno came and did an inspection because that's who our real estate agent had us use for our house in the city. And it's like we upgraded electrical and the whole shebang. But yikes. Stay safe. Ooh.
Yeah, well, fortunately, they did the permanent line installation and we're back up and running and all that. But getting any service professional out post-pandemic is amazing right now. It's just like so many electricians and plumbers and roofers. It's like people who didn't have a job done for a year and a half due to the pandemic are now all of a sudden like, oh yeah, we should finally do that. Like, let's get around to upgrading that. And so it's like we called, I think, 10 different electricians and like 2 of them called us back.
Yeah.
It was just like, whoa.
Yeah. And once you get a good one, stick with them. Because we've
Yes.
had a few people that we've used for things now that we can count on, but otherwise you're out of luck. I'm just glad you guys are safe. Did you have to upgrade like the amperage or anything?
Oddly enough, the breaker was, the whole panel was upgraded to 150 amps, but the service line coming in was only a 100 amp line.
Ooh,
So someone screwed up there and put
Somebody
in the bigger breaker. But on top of that, we have a first floor apartment that runs in on the same service line on a separate meter. So we were running 200 amp service through a 100 amp service line. Not recommended.
I don't know. The last time I checked math, that doesn't sound quite right. And 220, 221, whatever it takes. You've heard that old joke, right? Yikes. All right.
Susan, to answer your question, we did a DB query, and then we passed in our query as the first parameter in quotes, which was basically just selecting the time from the database. And that gives us an error and a response. We ignore the error because hopefully there isn't one, and we console log out our response. So when the server reboots, you're going to see your normal server listening on port 3001, and then our result coming in with a select, but it's the rows that we actually care about showing the time. So if you are not getting your rows back, it is probably an issue with your database connection or a syntax error in selecting it. And if none of that was helpful, feel free to share your screen or let me know and I'll stop sharing my screen so you can share yours. The good news is you're almost caught up, Susan. If you are at that point, then you should be pretty close. And by the way, if you think I am going too fast, chances are other people are going to think I'm going too fast. So feel free to unmute and, throw some speed bumps in my way. Tell me to slow the hell down and I will do that.
I might have missed it when you were like deleting the messages and everything because I was trying to catch up, but I'm just wondering why you didn't leave an empty, like let new messages array, just an empty array there instead of deleting the whole thing.
Great question. Definitely could have done that. But because we are going to get a messages array coming in from the database, I didn't want to confuse the two of them and have some messages that are in the server and some messages that were coming from the database itself. And so it was more of a better reminder for me to say, let's clean this and take all the uses of it out. So that way I know all the places I need to go back and wire the database like back into. But using a let messages equal blank array is a good way of approaching it as well. Totally a decent option to do. And yes, Latonia, I always look happy going super fast, but I'm not doing this just to hear my own voice. As much as I love my own voice, I'm doing this so you guys can learn it. So happy to slow down and make sure the content's sinking in. Okay, 7:17. We've got 8 people voting in the poll. Any questions that popped up over break before I keep going? Okay, so we've got our database working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out my select now for the time, but I am going to leave in my DB connect, right? I want to make sure that every time the server starts up, it's connecting into the database because we can't run a query until our backend has connected to our database server. So I'm going to leave in my database connect. Okay. So let's start with getting our messages. We ran an insert. We know the messages are in the database, so we should be able to run a query. But you notice we use a callback up here, and callbacks are kind of the older way of doing it. whenever we run a database query, we want to run it asynchronously so we can run some JavaScript code while the query is running. So what we are going to do is, fortunately, we know Express plays really well with async await, and in the past couple years was upgraded to natively support await code. So all I need to do is say, hey, in this endpoint, we are going to run this endpoint asynchronously. At some point in this endpoint, we are going to use the await keyword, and we can't use await unless we tell it, hey, the recres callback, that function, that endpoint is going to be asynchronous. Okay, so we add that in, and what I want to do is I want to get out my messages. So I am going to say const messages db. We can name that whatever, it's just a variable name. And I am going to await a DB query. And what would I like to do in my DB query? Well, I'm going to use backticks just so I have the freedom of using quotes and not worrying about it. And I am going to select. And what do I want to select? I want to select the content, the timestamp, and the received columns from my messages. And then I am going to res.send back my messages DB. Okay, I lied. We are going to use localhost 3000. So I'm going to open up a new tab. I'm going to go to my localhost 3001, and I'm going to do /messages. I'm going to hit enter on that. And what I get back is my messages DB, a command select, a row count, an OID, my rows, some fields, all kinds of stuff. The types, and I don't even know what that is. But what we want here is my rows, because if we look in my rows, hey, look at that. That's actually the insert command that I ran. So what I'm going to do is I am going to send back in my messages object that I'm sending back in the response, my messages, which is going to be my messages db.rows. And why is it .rows? Because again, if we look at what's in our messages DB object, our rows is here, and that's what actually contains the data. So if I refresh this, I get back just my messages. Okay, well, if my messages are working, if I swap over here to my React app and I refresh, well, I've got my date in here and I've got the message bubble showing up. So what's going on? Well, let's hop back over to Beekeeper Studio, and I'm going to insert another message. So I'm going to copy my insert statement. I'm going to paste it down here, and I'm going to say this is actually a message that we received instead of sent. And I will say my second database insert now with a sent message. And I'm going to run that. And it's going to give me an error because I forgot to highlight the insert command. So I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to hit run selection. I get my query executed successfully, no results. And I can run my select query again and see now that I've got 2 messages in there. Okay, so that's good. I'm going to come over here and hey, look at that. Even if we look at the timestamp, we can see that these messages were created an hour apart. But the messages content isn't in there. So something's working full stack here. Like the timestamps are coming back. The received information is coming back. We're doing full stack magic, but we're not getting the data that we want. And that is because I intentionally made this more difficult for you. Let's see where. So I'm going to pop over to my front end code, and I'm going to open up my source, and I'm going to open up my messages list. And my messages list has our received message and our sent message component. And if I go down to that, our component is looking for our message text. Okay, well, we've got our message and we've got our text, and heck, we even have our timestamp. And our timestamp is working and that's showing up. So what's going on with our message text? Why isn't that showing up? Well, let's go back to Chrome. I'm going to pop open my inspect. I'm going to go to network. I'm going to blow this up so you can see it. And I'm going to open up my messages. And my messages has an array. And my messages have the timestamp, the received, and the content. Does anyone see the problem? I've got my content, my received, my timestamp. My timestamp and my received are working. And it doesn't actually matter if it's true or false. That true or false is just saying whether it's going to show up over here or show up here, whether it's going to be a sent message or a received message. So the false isn't the problem, but our received is working, our timestamp is working, our content as text. What do you mean by that, Mel? So let's debug a little further. I'm going to go back to my front end code. And before my return, I'm going to just console log out my props.message. Let's just see what's coming up there. So I'm going to save, and I'm going to go over to my front end. I'm going to go over to the console. Here's my message, and my message content is here, and the timestamp and the received. Okay, my message content is there. Wait, my message content? You mean my message text? Oh, we are looking for a key in our message object called text, and in the database, it's called content. So now when I change it in the front end, my content shows up. Okay, that makes sense. We called the column content in the database. We ran our query in the back end and just passed whatever data was coming in the back end back to our front end, but our front end was looking for the wrong key. And that's why the text didn't show up. However, there are situations where you won't be able to modify your back end, but you'll be able to modify your front end, or vice versa. So I just showed how we can modify our front end to get that text to show up, but we're working more on the back end. So let's go through how we would fix that on the back end. So I'm going to go back to my front end code. I'm going to put it back to text because we already know that's working. I don't want to screw with my front end code. I don't want to make any changes there. So I'm going to go back to my back end code. And up here, we've got my messages rows. How can we loop over an array to change what the output of the array is? Think React. How do we loop over an array in React? We use a map. And what does that map do? It generates out a new array based off of what we are looping over in the map. So what I can do is I can map over this and get out my message. And I'm just going to console log my message to see what's in it. Okay, my message here has my content, my timestamp, and my received in it. Okay, we want all of that. So we are going to return whatever is in our message, but we are going to also say the text of our message is going to be our message content. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to comment out my console log so we don't have those lingering around. I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to refresh. And boom, my messages are there. I think it is time to stop, collaborate, and listen. I am going to kick off the poll and let you guys catch up. And I'm going to also share the code in Slack. Totally fine if you want to edit your front end and fix it both in the sent message and the received message to use that new content field. Now, I could have been smart and just made my column names line up with whatever was in that messages object, and then we wouldn't have that problem. But I really wanted to demonstrate that sometimes you want to fix it on the back end because you've got access to the data, you might as well fix it there. Or you may want to fix it on the front end because it may make sense to call that content instead of text. So it is possible that things do not line up, but when they don't line up, we kind of have to course correct and get them to line up. And we should take a moment to celebrate that we have just made our first full stack transaction of not only sending something from the front end to the back end. We went from the back end to the database ran our query, sent our messages back to our JavaScript, and our JavaScript and our back end sent it back through the response to the front end. So we in the database, instead of using message.text, or the text as the column name, we called that column content. And so if you look at the database table, our 4 columns are ID, content, timestamp, and received. And so when we sent that data back from our database through the backend to the front end was expecting that content to be in something called .text. And so it was like, text is empty. I don't know, like that's just not there. And so we could modify it on the front end and say, hey, don't look at text, look at the content. But we can also play with our data on the back end and copy the content that is in our messages object into the text key as well. Got 6 votes in there. So what I am hearing is you guys are still working on it. So I'll give you guys a couple more minutes. Based off of the results of the poll, I may be getting to the point where I'm losing some of you. So what I'm probably going to do is steamroll through this next session. Well, we'll go slow on the next one, and then the final 2, I'll go pretty quick on those, and then we'll just have the end of class to catch anyone up or answer questions or go back through YouTube or anything like that. Because I've got 3 of you following along and 6 of you ready to just keep going. So I'm going to adjust pace a little bit, but that's intentional. So we've got plenty of time at the end to answer any questions. Okay, so let's go all the way back to the days of CRUD. We've got our create, read, update, delete. Hopefully you're drawing some analogies now between, hey, a read is like a select, and we just did that. So now we want to be able to create our messages. Oh, a create is just an insert, right? So let's keep rolling with our code. I'm going to go and I'm going to borrow all of this code. Now I'll just start from scratch, change my mind. All right, so we're posting our messages. And we know our messages, when they get posted, if I switch over to my front end code and look at the message input, I can see we do a post request to our messages endpoint that has our text, our received, and our timestamp. Okay, well, we're not going to use the timestamp. We're actually going to use the time on the server. And the reason why we are going to do that is we don't want the user to be able to say, oh, I sent that message, 5 hours ago. Well, no, we always want the timestamp to be when it's actually sent. The user could fake this request here, right? They could go into Postman and say, no, that timestamp was actually 5 hours ago, and the database wouldn't know any better. So what we are going to do is move that into the backend code to say generate the time based off of the time on the server, as opposed to the time that the user is saying they sent that message. So I'm going to come in here and I am going to do my const insert query. And we're not really going to use the results of our insert query, but we'll see that in a second. And then I'm going to do an await, and I'm going to run my DB query, and I am going to insert into, and where am I going to insert to? Insert into my messages. What columns am I going to insert? I'm going to insert my content, my timestamp, and my received. Okay, and the values I'm going to save in there are going to be, and I notice I use my backticks here, so I can use my template literal syntax and say, oh, go ahead and insert in my rec.body.text. Now, why text and not content? Because my front end is sending it as text. So whenever I am matching up in my rec.body has to be the same. Now, because that is coming in as a string, I need to tell the database, hey, put that in quotes. And I'm using single quotes. Now, for anyone watching this video who may have a little more SQL experience, you may be screaming, that's a security flaw. You could use SQL injection. And you're totally right, and we will be covering that later. Just know that the way we are doing this is insecure and not recommended for your actual code. We will cover that in a second of why we don't want to do that. Okay, so we're dumping in our text, and then we are going to dump in our timestamp, and our timestamp is going to be now. And then finally, the received is going to be false because I'm sending that message in, right? So received is always going to be false whenever I'm the one sending the message. So I'm going to copy that whole thing, and I'm going to console log out our text just to see what's happening there. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to make sure my server reboots, and it's yelling at me. It's saying await is only valid in an async function. That's because I didn't give Express a heads up. Hey, we're going to be sending some asynchronous code here. So all I need to do is add my async keyword, and then my server should boot up fine, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to come over to my front end. I'm going to send ABC and hit send. Nothing happened. Okay, why not? Well, I come over here, and I'm not res.sending anything back. So the front end is like, yo, what's going on? But you notice my insert into messages ran, and this actually looks like a pretty valid SQL command, right? Like that looks like SQL that we would have written. And we can even go over to our Beekeeper Studio, run our select from messages, and would you look at that, there's my message. So it's in the database. But remember, whenever we posted something, we res.sended back whatever our updated messages are. So I'm going to come back to my front end. I'm going to just steal my select query from up here, and I'm even going to steal my entire res.send, because once we run that insert query, all we need to do is exactly what we did in the select, in the get request. Go grab that content, map over it, grab the individual messages, and throw the content back in a key called message. So if we save and we come over here, we can actually see my first database insert, my ABC. And if I send DEF and hit send, there's my DEF. And if I refresh this whole page, or if I come here, kill my server, start it back up, and refresh, all my data is still there. How do I know all my data is still there? Because if I go to Beekeeper Studio and run my select, there is all my data sitting in the database. Okay, Max, this is really cool, but I'm falling behind. You should wrap it up and not cover too much material. Okay, if you insist, you guys know best. I am going to quickly add in the edit and the delete buttons, just so we have all 4 CRUD operations working. And then we will use the rest of class time to catch you guys up or answer any questions you may have. So my put request, what I am going to do is I am going to say my query is going to be const update query is equal to my await db.query. and I am going to update messages. And I'm going to update messages. 1 second. Going to update my messages, and I am going to set my content equal to, and then I'm going to do a quote, and I'm going to drop in my rec.body dot. I'm going to go back to my front end, and I'm going to see where my put request is. Message list method put, and I am sending that in as text. So I'm going to match that up, but I also need my props.index. Okay, now we're running into a problem because we aren't really using indexes anymore. We should be using our IDs, right? Because the database is generating an ID for us, so we should use that. So instead of using my props.index, I'm going to look at my sent message, and my sent message already has access to my message object. So instead of saying props.index, I'm going to say props.message.id. And we are going to change our front end just a little bit to use our IDs from the database instead of using our indexes in the array. And so I'm going to do that here as well. Okay, and now in my update statement, I'm going to say set my content to my rec.body.text, and then where the ID is equal to my rec.params.id. And I also have to change my index here to say ID. So before I get too far, I'm going to grab my select and drop that into my update. I'm going to save that and make sure I make this async. Come back over here, refresh, and I'm going to edit, and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3 and hit OK. And we got some errors. Okay, what errors did we get? Error, column undefined does not exist. Okay, update messages, set content equal to what I do. So sometimes what I do is I just grab this whole thing, and I'm just going to console log it out to see if there was something wrong with what I dropped in here, to see if something is missing there. So I'm going to try my edit again. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, hit OK. And now in my back end, I have my update messages set content equal to 1, 2, 3, where ID is undefined. Okay, so just by adding in our console log, we saw that our ID part, our where statement, wasn't working, right? Because that's undefined in what console logged out. So it must be a problem with my rec.params.id. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my front end code and see if I'm sending that wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log out my props.message, and we're going to see what's in our message. And come over here, I'm going to refresh. I'm going to click on edit and type in 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to hit OK. And here is my message logging out. But you notice it does not, let me make sure I'm doing that on the right line. That is from message list. You notice it does not have the ID in here. So the front end doesn't know to send the ID because it's not getting the ID in the array. And so we need to figure out why that is. And that is because if we go up to our select query, what are we selecting? The content, the timestamp, and received. We're not selecting the ID with it as well. And so I'm going to drop ID in all of these. Don't forget your comma at the end of it, or else it will throw a fit. Save, refresh, come back over here, edit, do my 1, 2, 3, hit OK. Well, my 1, 2, 3 is there. That's good. It is doing some weirdness with my timestamp and moving it to the end, but we're not going to worry about that. We've got our edit working, so we'll leave that as is for now. And then I am also going to do my delete query. So I'm just going to take this. I'm going to take all of that actually. Throw it in my delete. Going to do a delete from messages. And then this we can actually, because we're just deleting, delete out where the ID is equal to that. So I'm going to save. I'm going to change this to delete query so it's more accurate. I'm going to wait for my server to reboot. I need to make this async. Refresh. I'm going to delete out my ABC message, hit OK, and it's gone. And I know it's gone because if I go over Beekeeper Studio, run my select, you can see it disappeared from the database as well. Okay, that was a lot. The good news is that is all I have to cover tonight. So you've got 45 minutes to figure out what the hell I just did. The homework for tonight will be back over in Google Classroom, and it will be to get the existing chat backend working with your Postgres database. So all 4 endpoints that you have, you will need to rewrite to make sure that it is sending data to and from the database. I did lie. There was one more thing that I wanted to cover, and that is good old Bobby tables. So what happens if we look at our put command, right? I'm sorry, our post command. We're inserting into messages, and we're dropping in these values, right? So just for the sake of a demo, I'm going to just move my messages to the end, my message content, because we've proven that whatever the order is in the columns is what matches up with our order down here, right? So that's not going to impact the running of this code. That's going to work fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy that whole insert, and that whole query actually, and I'm just going to console log it out so we can see it. So I'm coming over here, I type in ABC, I hit send, and here's my insert into messages, my timestamp, my receive, my content. My values are going to be now false in ABC. And if we come over here, we see my ABC working, everything's great, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to come back over here, and now I am going to insert some message, and I'm going to close off my message with a close quote. And then I'm going to do a parenthesis and a semicolon, and then I'm going to drop my table called messages. And then, by the way, ignore anything coming after that. Well, crap, that looks a lot like SQL to me. And that SQL, we're taking that message and dropping it right in our query. So if I hit send on that, and I scroll up to the top, we've got our insert into messages, or timestamp receive content. All of that's good. The values are going to be now false message, drop table messages. And then, oh, by the way, we had that closing quote and parenthesis there, but because I added a dash dash, it's going to read that as a comment and ignore it. Ooh, boy. I just realized that I can send a message, and because I'm taking the message and dropping it right into my SQL, I can inject a SQL command to run right in my messages. And oh crap, that table is going to drop. So we have to fix that. Stay tuned tomorrow for how to do it. For right now, just work on getting your 4 endpoints working. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I will paste all of my code in. But again, I know when you've been naughty. I know when you've been nice. I know when you've been copying my code. So do not copy large sections of the code. Try and type it all out yourself. I'm going to grab my server.js and share that with you guys. And then the front end changes, I'm going to leave up to you to figure out what you need to tweak on the front end to get it working in your back end. Carolyn, in case you are wondering, I drink Amazon Basics. Their coffee is surprisingly good on Amazon. I order their 3-pound bags, and that's all I drink.
Yeah, you probably figured out I was referring to your infinite energy.
Oh, it's not infinite. Trust me. There's a whiskey in a bed shortly after teaching.
I see. Yeah, I used to have that energy.
Oh, there are nights that it is a wonder that I can just rotate my chair 180 degrees and make it into my bed. It is I get the high of like all of the feedback and you guys getting your code running, and then as soon as I hit leave meeting, it's like, oh my god, I worked a 12-hour day again today.
So sprint across the finish line and then you do a face plant.
Yes, exactly.
I used to be like that. Now I'm just like a sloth.
All right, if you guys want to drop out of the meeting, I now promise there is nothing else that I am covering. So if it is easier for you to go back in YouTube, figure out what part of the video you are at, rewatch it, try and work through it. And then if you get stuck or have questions, hop back in here. That is totally fine. If you just want to work in silence or just hear what other people are asking, fine to stay in here. But totally up to you guys at this point. If you want to drop and go rewatch the video, that is fine with me. If no one has questions for me, Ariel, we can go in a breakout room if that works for you. Cool. I'll let you join on your other laptop or the laptop you're.
Yeah, I have it all downloaded. It was when you got to the point where it was like user, password, all of that for
Yep.
Postgres that I got really iffy. So
Yeah.
I've just been following along, but I obviously know React and SQL, so that's not an issue. But
Go
if we
ahead.
can join on the other one, that's great.
Yep. Go ahead and join this room on the other laptop where you're running Postgres, and then I'll do a breakout room with you.
All right, thank you. Am I on?
Ah, oh, sorry. There were two Ariels.
There's two of you. Okay, got it. Does that work for what? Nope, still hearing me on the computer. Either way. Hold on. Leave this one. Okay. So I have a share screen. Where I was last at, like I have them open. However, I have
So go ahead and hit initialize there
in which one?
in Postgres 13 in the elephant.
Where is it? Oh, this one? Okay.
Mhm. Okay. And you're good to go there. So you can just minimize that. We have to keep that
Yes.
open whenever we're using our database. And
Okay.
so we're going to hit select a connection type
Right. Okay.
and drop down to Postgres there. And then in the default database, we're going to type in your username.
Which is the Ariel Murphy.
Correct.
I don't give anybody my government name. Here we go. All right. Connect.
Yep.
So we're still leaving it at that tunnel.
Correct. Yeah.
That was my concern. I wasn't quite sure where we went past. Caitlin helped me work to this point, but I wasn't sure after this.
So we're going to create a database with the
Okay.
very hard syntax of create space database.
Okay.
And then we're going to call that messages one.
Okay. I'm on the computer. Okay. Sorry. I apologize.
Oh, all good.
My
So
kids
if-
were not here and then they suddenly were. Okay.
If you
So-
go into the pasted code channel in Slack, I
Yes.
can tell you what message to scroll up to.
I know there's like
Um,
5 here.
Yep, that one right there.
The create
No, I
database.
lied. We need to do one more step before I let you go. That create database messages one. Go ahead and run that.
This one?
The one right above it. The create database messages one.
Is that not where I am?
That is where that one is what you need.
That's what, okay.
No,
So
no.
is that,
The one at 624, not at 626. Create database messages
Okay.
one is what you need.
and I need that in the Postgres or the Beekeeper? The
In the
Beekeeper.
Beekeeper.
Okay.
So not that. We literally just need create database messages one.
What? Okay.
The one right
Oh,
above that.
this.
Yeah,
Literally this. Literally this with the C.
that's
Okay.
it.
Okay. And I apologize to everyone else because I feel terrible, but this is how far behind I am at this point. Beaky.
No, this
okay.
this is my fault because I told you not to join until 45 minutes instead
Is
of
your
30.
fault, Max. Okay. So I did
So-
that part.
Go ahead and hit run.
Okay. I am on the phone. No, you can wait a minute, please.
And so
Okay.
you got successfully executed, but it says no results. Now, when you hit run again, it tried to recreate the database, which is fine. So go ahead
Accidentally
and
hit yes.
close this.
Close Beekeep entirely?
Yep. And then reopen it from down in the dock because we want to now connect to that new database.
Am I quitting it first and then reopening or am I right
Just
here's
click-
fine?
Yep. Just if you left click on it in the dock, it should pop back open.
Okay.
And now we are going to select our connection type. We're going to make it Postgres again.
Okay.
But then we
Voice
are
is up. Sorry.
then the default database is going to be messages one. And then
Like
hit
that.
connect. Yep.
Okay.
And now you're in your database. So if you go back to Slack,
Mm-hmm.
we are going to create a table called messages.
This one.
Yes.
Here's my question. How do I know I'm in it? Because this looks almost exactly the same as the one I was in a minute ago.
In the bottom left, it says localhost 5432
This one?
messages one. Yeah,
So that's how I'm going to know what database I'm in
correct.
is with that left corner.
Correct. It
So is there
also
any-
says it in the top left as well, where we
Mm,
could technically switch between them.
I'm on speaker. So, okay. When I'm doing that, so do I need to check every time or is this like
Normally,
just
once
like VS Code? I need to make sure is there like a PWD for this?
the PWD is just what database is showing in the bottom left or top left.
Okay.
So normally when you connect to whatever database you are connected to, it will stay connected to that database.
Okay. I'm on speaker. Yes, I'm in class. Yes. Sorry. So then I know it's in the left, so I don't have to PWD or anything. It's just wherever it's listed on there.
Correct.
I can
So
get
you-
into Beekeeper and it'll be whatever file I'm in is in this left lower hand corner.
Correct.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll put mute because as you can all hear, it's very loud back here. Thank you.
No problem.
Hey, real quick, because I am behind. Was I supposed to do the Postgres SQL 13? You don't know. That's fair.
I'm sorry, Postgres.app is fine to be on 13.
I just went to downloads and clicked the latest release, so I wanted to verify.
That's fine. I'm behind, but what we're using is so basic it hasn't been changed in like 20 years. So you don't need to worry about being on a newer version.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure I had the right one.
I'm almost afraid to send this, but the 30-second feedback form is in the chat. And a reminder that it is not, you do not have to fill out the forms tonight. So if you want to let it all sink in and fill out the form tomorrow, that is also completely fine. Got another 13 minutes of class left. So even if you're still working in coding, but want me to go over a section again, just let me know what section and I'm happy to kind of talk it through and say why it's working or why we're doing it.
Hi, Max. This is Shah. Can I ask a question?
Sure, go for it.
So in our server, under server git, the query is select content timestamp received from messages. Is there a way to select like arrays? Like you have a lot of fields, so you just select, let's say, XYZ. I mean, instead of writing down all the rows.
Yeah, so we're selecting the columns, not the rows. So if we are specifying what columns we want back, we do that in the select. If we want to say, oh, we only want certain rows to come back in our query, we would just use the where query and add that there. It is also possible to use the select star if you want to say select all the columns as opposed to, listing them out. Did that answer your question, or can you reword the question?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
5-minute warning in case anyone has questions. Susan, try. Oh, before I open my mouth, I'm going to make sure I posted it right. No, I didn't post it right. God, I hate Google Classroom. All right, I just posted it in the proper module, Susan. So if you refresh it, it should appear in the right spot. Thank you for letting me know. Three-minute warning for anyone that has questions.
Max, I just wanted to clarify what files you wanted us to submit for the homework. So the server JS and then the Postgres table from Beekeeper?
You can just submit server.js.
Okay, thanks.
I'll clarify that in the instructions too. All right, I am ducking out of here. You guys have a good night. Oh, I got signed in on another device, so you got my green screen instead. I am heading out of here. So I'll see you over in that other Zoom link for our one-on-one after this. But don't worry if you're overwhelmed by all of this. We are going to practice this all tomorrow. We may not even cover anything new tomorrow. Just going to go over this all over one more time. And then we will move on from there. Because you've got another 3 weeks and a day with me. So you can't get rid of me quite yet.